Last week where I left you, Donna had not gotten it, but about Daryl, but the disciple, she had gotten it. See, it's messed me up. But the disciples didn't. So this week I thought we would go to 3 stories. I would like to take you there and talk about Jesus and how he treated other people and see if that would help us get there. And so if you looked at verse 1, for instance, Jesus sends out the 12. He empowers them. He gives them the ability to do miracles and cast out demons. Best of all, to preach the gospel. And they do that all without any kind of wallet, with any money, just expecting God to provide, and he does. And then go to verse 10, and we see that Jesus is now gathered with masses, 5,000 people on a hillside, and he has taught and he has healed. And the disciples say, we need to get these people a place to settle down for the night. So they need to find some food. And Jesus says, well, you feed them. And the miracle of feeding of 5,000 from just a few fish, just a few loaves takes place. Jesus treating other people. And verse 37, where just one little person, a boy with the demon, and Jesus casts out the demon and heals that boy. And I would like to tell you about how Jesus taught other people, but that's not what I'm going to do today. Instead, let's take those 3 stories, put them in the back of our mind, and let them just kind of set the table for us. Because what I really want to do is I want to look at the disciples. After having experienced these things in chapter 9 and other things before and during, after seeing Jesus and how he treats other people, I want to look how the disciples treated other people. And lucky for us, there are just 3 vignettes, 1, 2, 3, all in a row. And we're going to start with verse 46. So Luke chapter 9, verse 46, turn in your Bibles with me and we'll just follow there for a little bit. Verse 46 says, an argument started amongst the disciples as to which of them would be the greatest. I'm sorry, what? They are with this loving Lord, and what comes to their mind when they're together? They're like, who of us is the best? I'm better than you are. No, I'm better than you are. Now, I don't know who all exactly was involved in that. I kind of have to wonder if, because 3 of them went up for the transfiguration that had just taken place, had that argument started. If we look at another gospel, we'll see that there are 2 brothers in the disciples. His mother came to Jesus and said, let my kid sit at your left and your right hand. So this is not just a one-time thing. This is going on. And when I read it, I don't know, are you like me? I get kind of disappointed in the disciples. What are they thinking? Because what I see going on here is basically just simply narcissism. Thinking that we are better, we are greater than other people, and treating other people with that kind of disdain. Now, I told you about a book a few weeks ago. It's called Good to Great. I told you it was one of the best leadership books I've ever read. I probably said it was the best. I want to give you another book. It's called When Narcissism Enters the Church. Now, in the first service, they laughed. I'm not sure why. When narcissism enters the church. Maybe they knew some people that you don't know. When narcissism enters the church. And I preached a few weeks ago when I talked about in Good to Great that talks about, there's people that just think they're the only one that can fix things. They're the only one who has all the ideas. And we see this in our culture. It's modeling for people who want to be leaders. There's coaches like that. There's military people like that. There's politicians like that. And yes, indeed, there are pastors like that. While that is scary, the book makes it even scarier because the book says that those people in pastorates could not be in those pastorates and stay in those pastorates if the congregation wasn't full of people who want their pastor to be a narcissist. They like that. Just think about that for a second. So I meet with a group of interims last Friday. It's in a meeting we call First Friday. Really brilliant, right? Guess what? We meet every First Friday, yeah. Unless it's a holiday, 4th falls on it or something. And it's a time of fellowship, it's a time of mutual support, resourcing, but usually we have a topic, so it's a time of continuing education. And our topic this last Friday was pretty brilliant. I think it penetrated me, and it goes with our church where we're at right now. The question is, how far can a pastor who's an interim take a church envisioning and looking at their mission without stepping on the next pastor's toes? And the recognition from most of the people is that most people who are pastors will say to interim pastors, don't do any of that. I want to be the one who does that. So I started channeling a fellow named Levi Price. Okay, not really. That's a New Age spiritual concept, and I don't believe in that. But Levi Price, the late Levi Price, he just left us a couple of months ago. He was this guy who pastored First El Paso and took it to its heights. And it was, I assume it still is, but I know it fell off a lot after he left, but it was its heyday. It was an awesome church. I mean, when I got there after, not Levi, but his successor left to present intentional interim, they're on the side of the biggest building beside the sanctuary, which was the equivalent of about 6 of these rooms. That was their fellowship hall and gym. It said Levi Price Building. And he told them, please don't do that. And they said, you're not our pastor anymore. You don't have a say in this. And he left there to go to Truett at Baylor, Truett Seminary, where he became the first professor of pastoral care. And I had Levi lead us in a clinic. I've got it on, I guess it's on YouTube. We watch it as we do continuing training. It's part of intentional interim training. And it's all about how to help your church find its mission, find its vision during the interim time. And while he's starting, he says, guys, and I'm sorry, it's all guys in the classroom that he's addressing, but he says, guys, 90% of pastors do not have the personal, relational skills or the spiritual gift set to singularly cast a vision for their church and lead their church to do it. Now, I think Levi was one of the 10%ers, but he went on. He said, and even if you have that, that's not the way to do it. Well, the unfortunate part of that is that he didn't say this, I'm going to say it. Most of the 90%ers don't recognize that about themselves. And so we see pastor after pastor going to a search committee who says to them, if you come here, what are we going to do? What are we going to follow you, God's will? And most of those guys will tell you. Because they have one vision of what a church should do and be, and they will cast that vision, that one vision on every church they go to, no matter what, because there's a little bit of narcissism in them. Now, when the search committee asks that, and they get an answer, they don't necessarily tell the whole church what that answer was. But it's coming. But what I would say to a pastoral candidate who's going for an interview is, I'd say, when they ask that question, you say, I don't know, but I would hope to work with the whole church to discover God's will. And I will say to any of you who might be on the search committee, when they give you the answer, you might be a little gracious and just say to them, we were thinking maybe you would say, you don't know, but when you come here, you would work together with us to figure that out. And the person will go, oh, yes, that's what I think. I just didn't know I could say it. So you don't have a narcissist if that happens. But narcissism, I'm the only one who has an idea. The disciples were wrestling with that. They were doing that, and it disappoints me. But I know that's not in our church, right? So we're going to move on. And I know the disciples couldn't get any worse than that with how they dealt with other people. That's the first thing. But let's go down to verse 49. Verse 49, John talking says, Master, we saw someone driving out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he is not one of us. Okay, so I went from being the person who thought I was the best, the greatest, the smartest, to the person who wants to shut other people up, even though they're doing the Lord's work. That disappoints me in them. That kind of disgusts me in them. But I got to wrestle with it a little bit, because putting myself where they are, maybe I would be exactly the same. But it says this person was driving out demons in Jesus' name, and that's not a code. Like sometimes people will say, well, I'm a Christian. We're all Christians. Everybody in America is Christians. Right? This is America, for Pete's sake. Oh, yeah, I believe in Jesus. He was really a good person. So that's not what's happening here. This is the real thing. This is the real person who's really following Jesus, but apparently wasn't part of the 12, obviously, or the 40, or maybe even in the masses anymore, but was now off on their own doing ministry in Jesus' name. And the disciples are saying, shut up. I hope I'm not going to put myself back for a moment in the first one like I'm real special and above everybody, but I want to tell you about something that has blessed me. When my father was in the Air Force, from about first grade through seventh grade, I was in Air Force chapel. Okay, so we're on base, Edwards Air Force Base. There's no other civilian city around that you could go to. There were some young men and people that went off to other towns 30-something miles away. But if we went to church, you went to church on base. And when you went to church on base, you had basically two choices, Catholic or Protestant. And in the Protestant service, you had a very ecumenical service. And I think that helped me. I wasn't branded in any particular denomination. I was just learning the things of the Bible. And I remember one time the chaplain got up and he said, folks, we're from all sorts of different denominational backgrounds. So we've decided we're going to work in every Sunday a different practice from a different denomination just to experience that. And so that day he read the scripture, and at the end of it, he did a very Baptistic thing. He said, and the congregation said. It was silent. So he raised his voice. He said, and the congregation said, and there were a few scattering people like that. So he did it a third time, and the congregation said, dead silence. Until Tracy Whitaker, my sister's teenage friend up in the balcony, said, thank you. And that was the last time any of those individual denominational practices took place on base. So I got out of there non-branded, and when my parents moved to Texas, back home, we moved to a new neighborhood. There were no churches anywhere around. Nobody in my family went to church except my sister. She had gone off to college. So I'm home just doing Bible study, corresponded Bible studies with Calvary Chapel in Costa Mesa, until they told me after several years, we don't have any more correspondence Bible studies. Find yourself a church. And right at that moment, a church completed building its first building about a mile from my house. And so I started walking to an independent fundamentalist Baptist church. And it didn't take me but about a year to say, I ain't a Baptist and I don't want anything to do with Baptist. Although I kept going there through high school because the youth minister was great. And there were some cute girls, but I was convinced I was done with being a Baptist. It was mean-spirited. It was manipulative. It was racist. They knew the Bible. They were all about evangelism, but only if they didn't tell you to shut up and go away. And so I was plotting what would I do with a teacher at high school. My senior year, I got the opportunity to go experience a job for college-bound people, spend half of my week, instead of in the classroom, as an apprentice. I spent the first semester as a lawyer. Oh my gosh, are there any lawyers in here? He was a business lawyer. It was the boringest thing in the world. But then I told the teacher, my second semester, I'd like to mentor under a pastor just to test the waters. So I arrived at a Lutheran church in my old beat-up jalopy, and the pastor was in the parking lot pacing. And when I pulled up, he ran over and he said, I'm so sorry. I called the teacher. She was supposed to stop you. She didn't get you. And I just found out that my secretary's pregnant, and she just quit, and now I'm all alone, and I can't do this anymore. I'm just overwhelmed and sorry. Now, today I would have thought, now what does her being pregnant and quitting have to do with anything? But we won't chase that rabbit. I got back, and the teacher said, you know what? I only found 2 pastors, and I called over 100 that were willing to take you, and the other one's a Baptist. I said, okay. And I found that there were other types of Baptists. It was kind of our type of Baptist. And by the time I got to Baylor the next year, understanding the cooperative program and the theology was a match, I was this kind of Baptist for the rest of my life. Something happened then when I got to seminary. I had to find a church home, but instead of doing that right away, the first semester I was taking church history, mainly about Reformation and all the denominations, and I started visiting the different denominations that we studied that week with my wife, and it was awesome. And I just found the kingdom work was being done everywhere. Not everybody who says they're a Christian, not every denomination that says they're following Jesus does, but I was finding we are not alone. And I came to this realization that there's only one thing that matters. Is Jesus Lord? Now, we're going to get into the Connections focus point about what it means to be a Baptist and what we believe and how we practice. And it'll be things that I really believe that are really important, they're really crucial. But is Jesus Lord? When the youth came to me after a youth meeting one day and said, our pastor said nobody who's gay can go to heaven. Is that right? There's only one thing, not your sin of choice, but is Jesus your Lord? But the disciples, they wanted to tell this disciple who wasn't in their group, shut up. And that disappoints me, But surely that's not in our vocabulary, right? Surely we wouldn't be like that. And surely the disciples couldn't get any worse than that. So let's skip down to verse 51. Again, just 3 vignettes right in a row. Not sure why Luke gathered them like this, but it sure made it convenient for me today. And in 51 it says, as the time approached for Jesus, to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. He is heading to the cross. We're 2 weeks away from Easter. We're just 2 weeks, a little shy of Good Friday that this is about. It says, and he sent messengers on ahead who went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there did not welcome him because he was heading to Jerusalem. When the disciples, James and John, saw this, they asked, Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them? I don't know why that accent came up, but holy smokes, are you kidding me, disciples? Really? Well, let's talk about what was going on here. So you'll remember probably a little bit of history that about 600 years before this, the Babylonians have come in and they have conquered this Palestine area, this Jewish nation. They have conquered them, and as was the practice in those days, when you conquer people, you take a bunch of them as slaves. And so a whole bunch, not all, but a whole bunch went to Babylon. And when those Jewish people got to Babylon, they maintained their community and they maintained their faith. They were the keepers of the faith. And they did something really interesting. So I didn't know this until just within the last few months. I'm reading this book about the Talmud, and I discovered that Jewish believers believe in the Bible that we call the Old Testament. That's their Bible, particularly the Torah, but all of that Bible. But the rabbis would say to the common people, this sounds kind of Catholic, yes, this is God's word, and yes, it is important, but you can read it and still not understand what it says. So we will teach you what it means. We will teach you the truth behind the written word. And so for centuries, they had been passing on the teachings orally. But when they got to that captivity and they were so frail and at risk and fragile, they said, we better write this down. And so for the first time, the Talmud, the explanation of Scripture, the commentary, the experts saying to people that would later teach, later be rabbis of their own, that sort of thing, that this is the truth of what the Scripture means, that got written down. It was very important. And 100 years later, they get released and they get to go back to the Holy Land about 500 years before Jesus. And at that time, they found out, guess what? That the people who were Jewish that got left behind and not carted off, they had transitioned a lot in 100 years. They were not so faithful to the truth. They actually had their own Talmud, but it was a lot lesser and not as trustworthy. And so you can imagine when they got there and found that these people had lost kind of their religion, and mainly that was because they had begun to intermarry and not just be faithful to marry only people who have our faith, but marry people. It wasn't a color issue, it wasn't a race issue, it was a faith issue. They had intermingled, and now those people, they were kind of like half-breeds in their mind. Politically incorrect word, but that's what the Jewish people were thinking. And those people who were those inbred people, those were the Samaritans. And for 500 years, these two groups had just been clashing and not liking each other. And that not like had been growing and growing until that other group was the enemy. The Jews thought the Samaritans were the enemy. They were as bad as the Romans, if not worse. The Samaritans thought the Jews were the enemy. They were as bad as the Romans, if not worse. And now Jesus is going, he's preaching the gospel, he's doing his miracles, he's heading to Jerusalem, and the Samaritans say, well, then we don't want you around here. Don't even bother coming to our village. And the disciples' response is, Well, what did Elijah do? He brought down fire. We just saw Elijah, a couple of us up there on that mountain. Why don't we just bring fire down on them? Well, let's talk for a second about who are your enemies and how would you respond? So I just kind of got to thinking, who are my enemies? Who would be our enemies? Possibilities. And you think about yours, what did I leave out? You can tell me later. But I'm thinking we might respond by saying things like the Russians, the Chinese, Nazis, neo-Nazis, the other political party in America that we're not part of, non-believers. And by that, it could be an atheist, or it could be a Muslim, or some other religion. How about the cultural wars, those that we really are opposed to, like folks in the LGBTQ community? What about immigrants? I mean, pick your country of origin, but especially from that southern border. What about my neighbor who will not keep his darn dog off of my lawn, if you know what I mean? What about drug users? What about people who used to be in this church that left us over the last couple of years? And how would you respond? How should we respond? I'm thinking we might say to that person that has been our enemy, I see you, I hear you, I want to help you, I want to share Jesus with you, I want to walk with you through what you're going through, I want to pray for you. Wednesday night, we had some wisdom. We were just sharing, and somebody said, I have found that praying for somebody else sometimes impacts me more than it impacts that person. And somebody piped up and said, you know what? When I'm at odds with somebody, I pray for them that God will bless them, and that changes things right there in that group. But the disciples' response was, I'll kill you. So I'm at a church. It's a country church. It's white frame, wood. It's gone through some struggles. And I'm there, number one, to preach my stump sermon that I preached at all the interim churches the first time. And then I'm there to present the intentional interim after lunch in Fellowship Hall. And I'm about 3/4 of the way through my sermon when the door opens up. There's 2 sets of pews. There's 1 aisle in the middle. And that door opens up, and a young man starts coming down. He's a big guy, and he looks pretty rough. Okay, he looked a little scary. But I'm in a zone when I'm preaching. People say, that baby bother you? I was like, what, crying? I didn't hear it, So I'm kind of in the zone until he keeps coming, and in this day and age, I lost my zone. Because he walked so far forward, he passed the last pew filled with people. And he gets up almost all the way to the front, and now I have just stopped, and I'm just staring. I don't know if he's going to pull something or what. I have no idea. And then he sat down on the second pew. Okay, I collected my thoughts. I went on with the service. And then when it was over, I sat on the front pew right in front of him. I turned around, introduced myself. The deacons were talking, inviting people to lunch and stuff. And he said, I'm looking for my mom. I guess he didn't even recognize that I was a stranger. But I said, well, we're having lunch now. I hope you'll stay. But there's a lot of women in the kitchen that are fixing lunch. And it turns out that's what happened. His mom was in lunch. So we go through the day. I'm getting ready to finally leave. There's one other person. He was like the head usher when I got there, right at the doors, and he's going to close up, obviously. And he said, we'll be okay. We'll rebuild this church. We just got to get out there and love people. And I said, well, I think I know somebody you can love. And he said, who? And I said, that young man that came in during my sermon. I said, he's hurting. He needs some help. He said, oh, him? Billy, he's one of the members of our church, actually, but he's a drug addict. And his parents are in the church, and he has stolen from the church, and he has stolen from them and their bank account. In fact, he stole his dad, all his guns, to sell them for drugs. And he shows up every 5-6 weeks or so, and when he shows up, guess what? I'm waiting for him in the lobby. I have all the doors locked so he can't get in. So I have to unlock it to let him in, and then I frisk him before I let him into the sanctuary. So you were fine. You didn't have any worries. And the truth is, I'm a Vietnam vet. And I'm packing right here. And if he had tried anything, I'd take him out in a heartbeat. Now, he didn't do this, but that's kind of how I interpret it. And I just can't wait for that to happen. And now I don't know who to worry more about, that drug-addicted young man or this older fellow who wants to take him out. and call down the fire. Jesus, if you want to take them off this planet, then that would be wonderful. And if you use me to do that, that would be even better. We're traveling towards Easter. We're traveling towards Good Friday. This is a time the Christians all over the world are united in introspection and looking at your lives. And I'm going to invite you this week to look at your life and how you are treating others out there. These options from the disciples, I don't think are very good options. Am I right? But in each of those passages, Jesus gives another option. And so if you look at the first one, where they're fighting over who's the best, Jesus responds, he who is least amongst you is the greatest. Verse 8. In verse 50, he says about the guy that was casting out demons in Jesus' name, and they told him to shut up. Jesus says, don't stop him. Whoever is not against you is for you. And in these Samaritans who have denied Jesus the privilege of even walking amongst them, and the disciples want to kill him, in verse 55, unfortunately, we don't have Jesus' words. But we have this. Jesus turned and rebuked them, disciples. That is not what you should be doing. How are you treating your neighbor? How are you treating your enemies? How are you treating the world out there? I think these responses from Jesus are what we should focus on. That's what I'd call the Jesus way.